Hello, Malcolm Brady here from Dublin City University. I want to talk to you today about the strategy process, and I'm going to introduce two models, the Mintzberg model and the model from the Thompson and Strickland text. So we're going to start with the Mintzberg model, which is the one on your screen at the moment. This has been a very influential model, and largely now people believe strategy happens in this particular way. It is no longer regarded as a planned formal approach, and after a planning stage, people implement it in a formal manner. It's now seen that what happens is a mixture of what was planned and what emerges from the environment, let's say from interaction with the environment. Some quotes on the screen give us a sense of that. Jack Welch, CEO of General Electric for many years, said strategy was not a lengthy action plan. It was the evolution of a central idea through continually changing circumstances. So he, in fact, got rid of the entire planning department in General Electric at the time and substituted with an alternative process along the lines he mentions here. Now, he's actually paraphrasing von Moltke's quote above. No plan of operations can extend with any degree of certainty beyond the first encounter with the enemy's or competitor's main body or the environment. Only a layman could imagine that in following the course of a campaign, he is watching the logical unfolding of an initial idea conceived in advance, thought out in every detail, and pursued to its conclusion. Basically, he's saying it doesn't happen like that. Nothing ever works according to plan. That's not to say planning isn't important. Eisenhower says, the plan isn't important, but planning is. But the idea that everything is going to work according to your detailed plan is not the way things actually happen in practice. And there's a very graphic quote from Mike Tyson there that explains that more dramatically. Anyway, going on to Mintzberg's model, he looked at what actually happens, and he says strategy actually, the realized strategy, the element there on the right-hand side of your screen, that's really a combination of things that were planned. In other words, things that were deliberately set out, that were intended. The deliberate part of what was intended. And there was things that actually happened that were intended. And then the emergent part, and there was things that came up as time went on. So the realized strategy is a mix of deliberate and emergent. And the intended strategy, in other words, the original plan, some of that actually does happen, and hence the label deliberate. Some of it is realized, but much of it is not realized, and it just disappears. And that's arguably the correct way, because no point pursuing something that doesn't fit circumstances as they arise or as they unfold. So this is one of the critical factors now in strategic management, that you must adapt to circumstances as they arrive. And hence Mintzberg's model is very important. Okay, I'm having trouble moving my slides on. So again, I have to adapt to circumstances as they arrive. And I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to have to go to my laptop, move the slide on my laptop, and come back to it with you. So I'm doing that at the moment. And I'm going to pull up the second model, the model from your, so I'm going to try screen sharing again. And this is the model from your textbook. So it's, I'm not going to go into a slideshow that seems to hang Zoom for whatever reason. So I'm just going to leave it here with the slide showing as it is. So first of all, Thompson Strickland suggests 5 steps in the strategy process. And they say that these steps aren't necessarily all happening in a nice linear fashion, the way it's depicted on the diagram. They may happen consecutively, or they may happen simultaneously, or some of them may happen together, some not, or whatever. There may be time lags between them. But they suggest you need to think about strategy making in this as a set of 5 things. First one is understanding the purpose of the organization and developing that out, or setting that out as some form of mission, vision, values. In other words, describing it more clearly to other people, so that people know what the purpose is. Second point is setting objectives, and that's defining the purpose more specifically into more detailed elements, making it more operational or operationalizing the mission, vision, values, or the purpose of the organization. The third step, then, they say, is crafting the strategy. That's where you actually set out, develop the actions, maybe start implementing the actions in order to achieve your objectives and fulfill your purpose. Now, the crafting metaphor comes from Mintzberg himself, so it's following this intended and emergent elements. The fourth step then is actually carrying it out or implementing it. This is the execution phase. Our PACE framework talks about purpose, step one there. Analysis and choice is really to do with setting objectives and crafting the strategy. A slightly different way of viewing that, but covering that ground. Execution then is step 4 here in this process. And we spend little enough time on that in a course because little is known on execution for sure. So you'll find in your book or in most texts or most courses in strategy, maybe 20% of the lecture space is given to implementation, whereas in practice, implementation might take you 80, 90% of the time that you spend on the strategy project. So it's a huge task, but we don't know that much about it. We don't have that much to say from a theoretical point of view as of yet. So it's hugely important, even though I won't be emphasizing it all that much in the classes. It's not to say that it's not hugely important. And the final step is monitoring, evaluating, review, correcting. And it was the feedback loop where you see how you're getting on and then you change what's necessary. And the change there might be simply just to implement a bit more carefully or a bit more vigorously or whatever. Or the change might be that you actually have to go back and recraft the strategy. Something is wrong with your particular business model and you need to tweak it a little bit. Or you might need to go back and change the objectives altogether because they're just not fitting, they're not fit for purpose any longer. Or indeed, as we saw in the Robin Hood case, you might need to go right back and look at the vision, mission, values, the purpose of the organization in the first place. And some organizations have had to go right back to their purpose. IBM, for example, moved completely out of its main business area after the dot-com, after Microsoft, Intel and the PC started taking over the computer business. So IBM had to relook at its whole purpose at that point. Other organizations have had to do so as well. So that's our strategy process. Okay, just detailing that a little bit more, we're just going to look at the mission and vision and values, particularly mission and vision. Firstly, be aware that these are often used interchangeably. So there's no consistency out there in terms of how firms use these phrases. Generally speaking, the mission is to do with the present, what we do now, why we're here. The vision is to do with the future, where you want to get to, where you're going to, okay? So they're the two distinctions between them, but as I say, you'll see these things phrased differently to that in real life. And also you phrased interchangeably. Sometimes the mission is where you're going to go in the future and the vision is written often as what we're doing now. But theoretically, mission is to do with the present, vision is to do with the future. Generally speaking, the vision should be inspiring, overarching, long-term, graphic, not bland, not generic. A lot of mission statements and vision statements are pretty bland and pretty generic, but the suggestion here is that you actually make them as specific as you can, be aware that they're generally directed at employees, although sometimes firms use the vision or the mission to as in their advertisements to the customers or other shareholders. But in general, they're there for the employees, so the employees know what the organization is trying to do. Okay. This Ashridge business mission model, their 4-element model, is really, they're getting across this whole notion of the mission has to exist, but also a sense of mission. In other words, the employees must be aware of what the mission is as well, and they stress the importance of that. So that's the Ashridge people, Campbell and Young. You can read that in Long Range Planning if you wish more detail on that. Some examples of good mission statements, I think, are Mintzberg, quoted by Mintzberg again in the emergency room. They recrafted their mission to be to give assurance to the afflicted And I think if you look at this and think it out, you'll see, and they did think it out, why or how this really influences the way you approach your strategy for delivering care. So they found 8 out of 10 people in the ER needed reassurance and not really much in the way of treatment. But of course, if you're sitting in the ER and you're waiting for hours and hours watching people who are in much worse condition coming to you, you're not going to get assured. You're going to get more anxious as the longer you stay there. So they changed their whole operational objective to see each patient within 1 minute of arrival. And that totally changed the way they dealt with the ER. So compare that to any experience you might have had in other ERs, and you'll see the difference that a mission statement might make. So that was a recrafting of the mission statement. One of the most famous ones, of course, is Henry Ford's "A Car in Every Garage," which is very clear. And Microsoft piggybacked on that in the sense that they defined their mission as a computer. One time they defined it as a computer in every desk. An interesting one by Major General David Halverson, the Quartermaster General of the US Army, whose budget, I heard him speak at a conference, his budget was 258 billion. Okay, that's more than the Irish GDP, and that was quite some time ago, so it was a lot more then. And his mission was that to ensure that our men are never involved in a fair fight. So just think about that one and the full implications of that mission for the logistics people, the Quartermaster General, and the logistics people, the supply group in the Army. And then FedEx's former mission statement there was, we will deliver the package by 10:30 next morning. And that totally galvanized the way the organization worked, to the point where FedEx managers could and have done not commandeered, but rented a train or a plane in order to meet that deadline to get the package by 10:30 next morning. So the mission statements can be very important in, as I say, galvanizing and steering an organization. Sorry, I'm just skipping some of these. Second point then is the notion about setting objectives, and the SMART acronym is used often for objectives, and it's a reasonably good one to use. Specific, measurable, aligned, realistic, and time-bound. Specific meaning not vague or not unclear, that it should be precise in some way or other. So if you can imagine the manager of the under-12s football team shouting out to the boys out there in the field, do your best, doesn't help that much, because the boys are out there doing their best, and telling them that doesn't help them at all. But picking somebody up and telling him, listen, I want you to go and mark number 8 and stay within 2 feet of him the entire game, and interrupt him getting the ball anytime he goes to get it. Well, that's very specific, and the boy there will often spend the rest of the game doing exactly that, and hopefully will lead to a win for his side. Measurable, what gets measured gets done. So that's the philosophy behind the importance of measurement. Aligned, it must be relevant to the business strategy. There's no point setting objectives that have nothing really to do with the purpose of the organization or what you're really trying to achieve. So it's important that they're aligned. Realistic, challenging, but achievable. And time-bound. There should be some time frame set for objectives. They shouldn't be never-ending. They have to be done by a certain time, because deadlines force action. Okay. A quick point on SMART objectives. This SMART, the 5 elements there, should be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. So each one should be looking at a separate dimension of the concept of objectives, and collectively they should be looking at all the important dimensions. They shouldn't be missing something out. So I just want you to just note, next time you see the SMART objectives written out, the SMART acronym written out, just notice whether they're actually mutually exclusive. The elements given are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. They're often not, so have a look out for that. Here's a specific or an objective, and we'll just check it over with the SMART acronym. This is from the Stalingrad case study. So OKW Directive number 45, 23rd July 1942. To attack Stalingrad, smash the enemy concentration there, take the town, and cut off the isthmus between the Don and the Volga. All right, well, I think we can agree that's pretty specific. If you were Paulus and you received that on the teleprinter, I think you'd know what to do. Okay, notice that it doesn't tell them how to do it; it just tells them what's required. Okay, and that's part of the Auftrag tactic approach of the German army, German armed forces since the Prussian Wars. The commander gives the intent of the mission, or the objective in this case, gives the intent of the commander, and it was tells the subordinate what is required, but doesn't overly restrict them in how to carry that out. In fact, you provide least restrictions in terms of how to carry it out. So that gives, a great deal of specificity, but also a great deal of flexibility. And arguably, although it's not well known, is one of the reasons why German armed forces survived so well for so long under very severe conditions. Measurable, yes, it's measurable. You can measure it in kilometers advanced or in square kilometers of territory gained, and they were doing that all the time. Achievable, well, you need to look back at history to determine that. Possibly achievable, it wasn't, but as it turned out, but maybe with a different approach, different strategy, it might have been achieved. Relevant, again, some doubt here as to how relevant it actually was. Some of the elements, the cutting off the isthmus was certainly relevant. Taking the town may not have been as relevant. Time bound, obviously there's no mention of time here. I'm assuming that it was the follow-up directive giving them specifics about when they wanted it done. So maybe that could be included in the objective, and wasn't. Anyway, an example there of a SMART objective. Measurement. We talked about measurability. Again, from Mintzberg there, you can see, I'll let you read it yourselves afterwards, but he's basically showing a measurement of success in a surgical ward. And really, you can see there that the rates of success varied from 9 and 11 according to one person to 3 and 10 according to somebody else. So the same events, but very different measures of success, even though they were all measured, different measurement outcomes. So measurement isn't always a straightforward or simple process. Again, we have the second example talking about the 26% growth in GDP of Ireland, but really it was laughed off as farcical, even though it was technically a true measurement. It was distorted by aircraft leasing and multinational operations, and therefore not seen as actually valid, even though it was technically a correct measurement. So again, be careful with measurement. They're very precise. They can give an air of authority that they don't always they may not always deserve, so you need to check behind the measurement. Also measurements, and particularly targets, measurements that are targets which are measured, can drive behavior, in particular if the reward goes along with the target. Achieving the target leads to a reward, so it does drive behavior. An example here from Wells Fargo, where they had a target to increase the number of accounts, and that led to managers or employees opening fraudulent accounts on behalf of either customers who didn't know there were accounts open on their behalf, or fraudulent, customers made up. But certainly these were fraudulent accounts. It was found out, and you can see in the last paragraph there, Wells Fargo suffered quite large financial penalties, and the employees involved suffered major penalties as well. And you can see here 5,300 employees were fired. Okay, so major implications there for a target that went wrong. So again, you have to be careful. Targets drive behavior, and it needs to be the correct behavior. Objectives can conflict. The basic one there of the window, you can see there, basic conflict between light coming in and heat escaping out. And hence in the past, windows were often very small in favor of keeping heat in, but rooms were very dark. With the advent of it, with the technological change of 2-ply and 3-ply windows, we can achieve a lot of light and reduce heat loss. But until the technical innovation that led to that, you had to make a choice between one or the other, so they were conflicting. So the point is, first of all, you need to be aware that maybe objectives are conflicting, and it may be possible to align them through some kind of change, the technological change that I mentioned, but it could be some other change. Maybe you change the nature of your objectives a little bit so they don't conflict quite so much, and there may be a trade-off. You may have to favor one over the other, so to be aware of that. So we come to our last slide here, which is really just the other side of SMART objectives, that specific is good in the sense it concentrates the mind, but it can lead to a bad effect in that it leads to myopia or loss of interest in the job for its own sake. Loss of interest in loss of intrinsic motivation, because you're now following, a specific measure that you mightn't have too much regard for, but you have to do. We mentioned measurability already. Some things aren't easy to measure. So we said what gets measured gets done, but Things that aren't easily measured may not get done, and they may be very important things. So again, you need to be very careful of that overly focus on things that can be easily measured and less focus on things that are less easily measured but may be important. Realistic, if they're overly challenging, they can lead to the behavior we saw there at Wells Fargo, fraudulent behavior, or indeed overly risk-taking behavior. So again, be careful. And time-bound, that's back to our old question of the balancing the long run and the short run. Specific objectives, if they're time-bound in the short run, tend to be achieved because the focus comes on those, but often to the detriment of the longer scale strategic objectives of an organization. So you have to be careful of that as well. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to halt the recording then. So thank you.